Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Computer and Digital Forensics Demystified and Other Things That You Need to Know But Were Afraid to Ask. Before we begin our presentation today, I would like to take a few moments to go over some housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar, and this webinar is CLE approved, and we will be asking that you enter a passcode for CLE credit a few times throughout the presentation. In today's webinar, Ms. Hassell will discuss science and technology that is used in computer and digital forensic investigation, how information is gathered and discovered, steps that need to be taken when starting a computer forensics investigation, and the implications of this technology for your practice and clients. To give you a little background about our presenter, Johnette Hassell, she has more than 45 years of experience in the computer and software industries. She has a doctorate in mathematics from Tulane University. Ms. Hassell has more than 50 years of teaching experience at the university level. She is a qualified expert witness in Louisiana, Texas, Colorado, Missouri, Delaware, and New York. She is the founder and CEO of Electronic Evidence Retrieval. She has also written several publications in the areas of e-discovery and computer forensics. For those of our attendees who require a code word for tracking purposes, the code word for today is forensics. During the presentation, we will take short breaks, and during that time, we will ask that you enter this code into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself. Also, please remember to complete the survey that will appear to the right of your screen at the end of the presentation. As a provider of CLE credits, we are required to have supportive information that you have attended, and in many states the survey is required. CLE certificates will be provided within 24 to 48 hours via email. Also, the PowerPoint slides can be downloaded from the resource list on the left of your screen. Dr. Hassell welcomes your questions. Please use the Q&A widget to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We will take intermittent breaks so that Dr. Hassell can respond. Thank you all again for attending today, and Johnette, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. While you're getting settled in, a couple of more things about my background. If you listen to the background, you discovered I'm not an attorney, and I don't play one in real life either. However, I have been doing this for a long time, and I know a good deal about how the law applies to digital forensics and e-discovery, but I will refer all legal questions to attorneys. Secondly, you may notice that there's a slight change in the title of this presentation. It now includes digital forensics as well as computer forensics. The reason for that it should be obvious. There are hundreds now of types of devices that collect digital data that are not computers, everything from cameras to your car and even to ID tags that we put on our dog. That's one of my favorite cases. Basically, when we're talking about digital forensics, we're talking about two different kinds of cases. The first one, and really the most common one, is when the computer is incidental and it's used as a communication or a display device. And as I said, these don't have to be computers. Now, I say this is most of the cases because 90% of all new information is generated on some kind of digital device. So almost any case that you deal with is likely to have had information on a digital device at some point or the other. The kinds of cases we see range from trade secrets and copyright infringement, child pornography, bank robbery. There's a famous case about a bank robber getting caught because his notes had metadata in it that told who he was, and I'll be telling you about metadata. And obviously, my home office is in New Orleans, so we're very accustomed to worrying about oil spill and what's in those cases. And in fact, that case was broken open by some emails between an engineer and his superior. For deliberate manipulation, those cases are a little less common, and they're often handled by some very large governmental organizations. But in these cases, someone has deliberately manipulated the computer to make it look like something it's not. Hidden messages in Al-Qaeda video are one of the most common ones. Attempts to have secret communication, you can talk to General Petraeus about that. embezzlement, hiding assets, all kinds of things that you want to hide may be hidden by deliberately manipulating the media. So what are computer and digital forensics, and how are they possible? Some of my clients think it's a bit of magic. But if you look in the dictionary, wherever you see forensics, you'll see an emphasis on science and technology and its use in litigation or crime investigation. And if you're looking at a TV show about a crime, you'll hear a detective say, "Get forensics in here." And you know what that means. They're going to come in and look for blood splatters and fingerprints and shell casings and such. The same thing happens with us. When you say get forensics in here for a digital device, there are a variety of kinds of artifacts that we're going to look for. And my purpose in this presentation is to show you and tell you about a number of those artifacts. It helps in understanding forensics to have a mindset about what a computer really is, something other than an alien to be dealt with. But think of all of your computer tools, whether they're legal or general use, as being translators. They take all the zeros and ones that a computer knows and put them into some sort of form that you recognize and can use. And to do that, the operating systems have a real juggling act. They'll do a little bit of one thing, put that aside, and then take another task and do a little bit on that one, and then another task, and circle through all the things that it's working on. And unlike a juggler, it can't put things up in the air. It has to put things in places to hold them temporarily while it's doing this juggling act. And it's many of those little hidden temporary places that yields the kind of forensic data that we find helpful in cases. The first thing to talk about is the directory. When you're looking at any digital media, it will have somewhere on it a directory, and you can think of the old-fashioned phone directory, or you can think of the kind of directory that you see on your iPhone and iPad and other smartphones. But what they all have in common is that we take a particular object, whether it's a person whose phone number that we want or a file whose location we want, and we list those objects and where they are. So the directory on a digital device is just a list of the files that it knows about and where they're stored. So the directory is the key to understanding what really goes on under the hood of the operating systems. So I'm going to talk about what does delete really mean, and the directory plays a key role in that. I'm going to show you some of the other kinds of data that operating systems keep that you don't know about, but that I can get access to. And I'm going to show you how we get at some of these secret stockpiles of data. You'll see in a number of places that I mention Windows, what I'm talking about applies to any operating system, including all of the Apple products and the various specialized products that you will see. I also will, from time to time, mention specific tools. And I'm not paid by any of these companies. I don't consult for them. I don't get any royalties from them. But clients routinely ask me what kind of tools they can get to do certain things. And I think it's important to you to hear some of the common terms so you'll recognize when someone is talking about things that are well known and routine. So we begin by talking about digital media and deleted files. Now, as I intimated when I talked about the title, this can be all kinds of devices, not just hard drives. Computer games, Xboxes, CDs and DVDs, GPS and the tracking apps. At least several famous cases were solved because tracking apps kept latitude and longitude information about a suspect. All your BlackBerries and smartphones, and of course any digital photograph will have information in it. So the first thing to talk about is what happens when we delete files. Well, the first thing that happens is we go to this directory that has information about where the file is, and we flag it as saying, this file is deleted. That's, think about a Post-it note. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself here. Think about putting a Post-it note on a file cabinet and say, next time you clean out the files, delete this file. But when this flagging is done, nothing is done to the file itself. And both the file and the directory are intact. So we can still see the file, and we can still get into the directory and get information about it. But the space this file occupies is now called free space or unallocated space because it's available for somebody else to use. Now, this is what my life looks like. You'll see it's kind of busy, but this is the forensic view presented by a tool named Encase, which is one of the big players. And we're looking at this file right here named Spooky, and you'll see that it's grayed out, so that's the one that we're highlighted. My forensic tool says that the file is deleted, and it gets that information by looking at the directory. But down here where the contents is listed, you can see that there's stuff there. It's not all zeros. Now, you can't tell what it is because this is the raw file, but it's clearly not an empty file. And now if we look at it instead of as the raw data, you can see down here in the lower part that it is a graphic file. So even though it's deleted, it is still there in its entirety. So deleted isn't deleted, and these files hang around until we get rid of them. Here's a similar example. This is a file that you'll see here has some sort of cryptic name. And notice that it has an extension, that is the .tmp. That tells us that it's a temporary file. And these are the kinds of files that we delete when we're trying to clean up our system and make more space. However, the forensic tool says it's a picture, and it got that information partially from some of the information in the directory and partially from information in the metadata, which is the next topic I'm going to talk about. But if you look down here, you'll see that it clearly is full of text. And when I do stand-up classes, I can tell who's paying attention by seeing who laughs out at this. But notice what this could be. This could be any kind of document that's a secure document. It could be contract negotiations. This is a favorite trick of child pornographers in an attempt to hide those kinds of pictures. So the lesson from this slide is that you can't depend on the name of the file or even anything that the system says about the file. You may have to actually look within the file itself to tell what's going on. So one of the questions I get most often is, how do we delete for real? And the only way to well, that's not true. The primary way to delete for real is to take a tool that will overwrite the space that you want to have deleted. You can also resort to things like taking it out into the forest and shooting it with a shotgun, as one of my clients did. But short of physical damage of the drive, the way to delete it is to have a tool that will go in and overwrite the sections that you want to have secure deletion. Here are the names of some common ones. You'll see the second one on the list is Evidence Eliminator. That's one of the oldest ones, and it makes judges furious when there's evidence that someone has used this. And these have a place in even non-criminal systems. We use them frequently. Every time we have a case that closes, we run one of the deletion routines over everything that was related to that particular client's case to make certain that we've removed all of their data. Doing that helps your system run faster because you have more clear space and more easy space. So it's something that I recommend that you do regularly in your own practice. It's a little bit like brushing your teeth every day. It's good disk hygiene. So in terms of you and your clients, I will tell you, like to delete documents. And by the time they're talking to you, they probably have an obligation to preserve. So I advise that part of your routine intake is to advise your clients of their obligation to preserve. Most of these deletion tools can be detected if you know how to do it. I would not issue a challenge in saying no one can get past me in the future, but so far, no one has gotten past me with this. As I said, clean up your own files. I ran into this issue as a college professor when I wrote recommendations for students for graduate school. I would save and resave the document under several different names, and later on found a need to make some changes in that, and I will talk more about that particular example in a minute. But one of the things one of our smart students learned to do was to write a program that would just grab a whole bunch of memory and then start looking at what was in that disk memory, and he would find copies of tests and budgets and whatnot. So cleaning up your own files and overriding things that you no longer need will cut down on the chances of you having a break-in and losing secure data. Nobody wants to be the headline about a break-in in their system where anything has been gotten. Now, I do a lot of work in e-discovery, and the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure allow for certain kinds of deletions. Those are deletions that are part of routine business operations. So if you're operating in that domain, be sure and look up these provisions for safe harbor. The next topic, and I've alluded to this already, is metadata. And this is one of my favorite topics in all of the forensic world, possibly because I found the smoking gun several times in cases by looking at the metadata. Now, what metadata is about is all digital files contain some information about themselves within the file. That's why it's called metadata. If you've ever held your cursor over if you've ever tried to open a file that's marked PDF and you get a message from Acrobat saying, cannot open file does not begin with PDF, what Acrobat is complaining about is that there should be metadata inside the file that says, hey, I'm a PDF file. And that metadata is missing. So Acrobat says, nope, you're not a PDF file, and refuses to open it. And I'm going to show you a simple trick so you can see this metadata, or see most of it. Sometimes it's encrypted, but generally you'll be able to see most of it. Now, there are two kinds of metadata. The first is data that's readily accessible to the ordinary user. This includes what are called the MAC dates that I'll talk about in a minute, the original name of the document, and that typically lingers even if the document has been renamed. The original author of the document, and again, that typically lingers in the metadata even if it's had other authors. There's also other data that's not typically available to the user unless you happen to know the trick that I'm going to show you, or unless you have a specific tool that will let you see metadata. Now, I'm usually asked, how can you deal with metadata? In other words, can you see it? Can you get rid of it? What can you do? There is a tool called Metadata Assistant that works on Microsoft Office files that will show you the metadata and give you the opportunity to remove it. The 2013 versions of Microsoft Office tools, at least Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, give you the option of removing that metadata. The other thing that you can do is you can save your document as a PDF document. That removes the original metadata. It puts in some more metadata that's PDF basic, but nonetheless it gets rid of the original metadata. You can also, if you're using a Word product, you can save a file as in a format called RTF, which stands for Rich Text Format. Save your document in that format. That gets rid of most of the data, and then you can reopen it as an ordinary document. Now, the first thing to talk about is the MAC dates, and these play an important role in many investigations, and they are confusing. The M stands for last modified, and that's the last time a file was changed on any computer, not necessarily the one that it's on. And the last access date is the last time anybody did anything with it, whether they emailed it, moved it, renamed it, opened it and looked around it, printed it, whatever. As long as they don't change it, then it's counted as just an access. And then the C stands for the created date, and that's the date that the particular file appeared on the digital media that you're looking at, on the computer that you are looking at currently. So no matter where the file originated, the creation date is the date that it landed on this computer. So we'll illustrate that with the example. Let's suppose that you have a document of some sort that you created on June 1st. You worked on it on the 1st and 2nd, and then finished with it on June 2nd. Then your created, modified, and access dates would be June 1, because that's the day the document was first on your computer. The last modified date would be June 2nd, because that's the last time you modified it. And the last access date would be June 2nd, because you accessed it when you modified it. Now let's suppose that you email that to somebody on June 3rd. Notice that the creation and the modified dates stay the same, because it was still created on June 1 on the original computer. It was still last modified on June 2nd. But you accessed it on the 3rd to email it. So that access date on the original computer now changes to June 3rd. And for the recipient, you'll see that on the recipient's computer, the creation date is June 3rd, because that's when they got the document in email. So that's when it's landed on their computer. The last modified date will be June 2nd, because that's the last time anybody changed it, even though that changing was done on another computer. And the last access date is June 3rd, because that's the date that it was emailed. And that leads to this kind of crazy situation that you see down here in the bottom right. The creation date is after the modified date. And that happens because the creation date references this computer alone, and the modified date refers not only to this computer but to all the previous ones. Now, these dates this modified date in particular may become important if you're looking at things like contracts and who changed what when and who knew what when. It can also show up in child porn cases in helping to track where a particular document or alleged piece of child porn came from. Now, the things that you can't see without specific techniques include things like subsequent authors, the other names the document was saved under, other names it's been saved under, and so forth. And I'm particularly proud of the where printed, because we used that in one case to essentially find the smoking bullet. I have an example here. This is a real-life example. This is a handout that I used for my classes. You can see this is a software engineering class, and it's all nicely lined up and pretty, etc. If you look at the metadata, you'll see all of this. And I cleaned it up just a little bit to take out stuff that's not relevant to this presentation. But this is all authentic metadata, straight from what's in the document. The first thing you'll notice is up here, there was a user with the name Johnette Hassell in capitals that saved this document in a directory called CPSC 305 Spring 98. You'll also see that down here, another user named Hassell, all in lowercase, saved this document under the name just CS 305 Spring 01. Now, the Johnette Hassell name is my username on the computer in my company office. The Hassell name in lowercase is my username at the Tulane Computer Science Department. So this demonstrates that this document was on these two different systems. Now, if I'd been accused of stealing a design or customer list or something, and I found this inside the customer list, then I have an argument that indeed this was stolen. The other thing to notice here on the Hassell line is that this was stored in a directory named CS305 Spring 01. If I go to that computer and this directory no longer exists, then I can argue that the user not only deleted documents, but deleted whole directories and altered the directory structure of the system to try and hide what they were doing. The last two things that are of interest in this one, the last three things. Down here you'll see CPSC 206. So this same outline was also used for a completely different course. So I'm caught here reusing documents. Now, if you use boilerplate for certain kinds of arguments or pleadings, this could bite you where it would hurt. And this is the kind of data that may or may not be visible and usable by the ordinary user. And again, the trick I will show you will let you see it yourself. And finally, the last two things in this one are the ones that I'm proud of. This at HP5M local is the desk side printer at my Tulane office computer system. The HP LaserJet 5P, etc., is the networked printer in my EER office. So again, I can argue not only was this document on both of these computer systems, it was actually printed. Now, the next one, this is, again, it's real case data from my very first big forensic case. It was Dow Chemical, who had an employee and ex-employee who was taking new processes and trying to sell them to China, which is against the law. So if you start at the top of this metadata, you can see that someone named employer saved this under the name new in the directory called new product under the document name process manual. Now the employer, that just means that there wasn't a specific username that did it, and it was fairly common. So in this case, it would have said Dow and DuPont Dow. The next line, this same manual is saved again, but now it's in a directory named China Project. Now Dow had no China Project, and by the time I got to the original computer, this China Project directory was gone. Now, to reemphasize, this is data that I found in the process manual after it had been given to outside parties. So what we're tracing here is the life history of this document and how it was taken from the employer to the other parties in the conspiracy. So on the third line, you'll see this A:\backslash. Hopefully you at least remember floppy drives. So this manual was saved to a floppy drive, and it was taken to Bob Smith's home computer. His username is Bob Smith on that one. And again, you see it saved under user manual as China document. It was then moved to a co-conspirator who had not given a username to his computer, and it defaulted to the standard username of preferred customer, and that's an HP machine. And in the process of the investigation, we found that the co-conspirator had an HP machine that had the default username. And similarly, it was then moved to a Dell computer that, again, didn't have a username and defaulted. And then finally, it was saved in a file named Chengdu, which is one of the places the conspirators were intending to sell this process and build a new process plant. And again, all of this was in a copy of the manual that we got after he'd been given to the co-conspirators. So out of all this metadata, the only metadata that the user would have easily been able to see was the employer, who was the original author, and the process manual, which was the original name. All of this data, the remaining data, was gotten to with some other technique. So I'm going to take a few questions now and see what people have to say.
And before we begin the question-answer segment, could all the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A?
Okay, the first question I have is, a client allowed to delete anything off their computer, or is that considering tampering with the evidence? If it could reasonably be expected to lead to relevant and discoverable data, I believe is the language of the law, then they're not allowed to delete it. If it doesn't satisfy that, then deletions are allowed. Again, I answered that question. It's a legal question, and you should confer with an attorney who's familiar with the laws. If you have a business client and they have in place routines that routinely delete things, like they expunge data, email more than 90 days old, etc., they may have to terminate those deletion procedures. You need to confer with an attorney and with an e-discovery or forensic expert to make certain that you're keeping everything you're supposed to keep. Okay. Well, there'll be another chance for questions as we go along. Now I'm going to show you the trick. This is, again, a Windows computer. And what I'm going to show you will allow you to see all the text that's in a file. And usually metadata is in text. Which allows you to see. In fact, this is the way the first time I got the metadata out of my document that I showed you. And the way it works is this. Inside Microsoft Word, you say open, and this works in both Windows and Apple. But down here in the bottom where it says files of type, if you make 2 or 3 clicks down, you'll find something that says recover text from any file. And if you choose that as the file type and then open a file, it will show you everything in there that is in ordinary text. And whatever metadata is in text, you'll be able to see it. And this works for Word documents, Excel documents, WordPerfect documents, everything. I will warn you that some tools keep more metadata than others. Occasionally some of it is encrypted and you can't see it, but this is how you can see what is there. Okay, there's another question that's popped up here I'll take. How is free space created if the file is not actually deleted? It's just called free space. The computer says this is free. You can have it if you want it, even though there's something in there. It's sort of like if you were renting a house and your landlord told you, I'm going to put the house up for sale, but you can live here until it's sold. That data has been told, I'm going to take your space at some point, but you can stay here until I take your space and overwrite you. So it's free in the sense that it's available. It's not free in the sense that it's empty. Okay, metadata and discovery. The federal rules for civil procedure are specific in saying that you're entitled to the metadata of your documents. So whether you're in federal civil court or not, I advise you to ask for the metadata. It may make the attorney on the other side angry, but you're entitled to it. So I always advise asking for it. Most of the e-discovery tools that are out there provide the user-available metadata, so that would be the MAC dates, the original author. Sometimes they will show you other authors as well. Some of them are really smart, and they will show you things like text that's been formatted in white font, which makes it pretty hard to read. However, there are some of these pockets that you can't get to without a forensic investigation. And when you talk to an e-discovery or forensic expert or service provider, they can give you some guidance as to whether you need to go into the forensic world or you can stick to the e-discovery world. Again, following up, I encourage that you include metadata in your discovery request. Now, anytime you change the form of a document, as I indicated, changing to PDF is one way to get rid of it. But changing to text and TIFF formats do not preserve the original metadata. So you want the metadata from the document in its original form, that's customarily used by the holder of it. And you have to include the metadata in your client's obligation to preserve. And that's in there because if your clients start looking around in these files and futzing with them, that's a technical computer term, futzing with them, they can very easily change the metadata, and then they might be accused of spoliation and trying to hide evidence. Now, the next topic is about a couple of other hiding places, and again, they're kind of a fun topic. And I like this particular topic because it's the way we get hold of some really old documents, and it illustrates, I think, why the practice of doing secure deletion is a good one. Okay, I have a question to say, did you say that recover text from any file will show the existing metadata? It won't show the detailed metadata you were going over earlier, right? No, it will show everything that's in there. So if you think back to that example of my here, all of this turned up when I said recover text from any file. And the only thing that was visible to the ordinary user would have been the original file name and the original file author. So all the metadata that's there, if it's written in plain text, will show up when you do recover text from any file. So we're back here to file slack. And I think of this as hitchhiking. Someone's hitchhiked along and been left around. So think of an electronic device as something like an old-fashioned vinyl record. It's divided into sectors. And when the directory manager says, okay, you can have this space, it assigns that space in whole segments only. It's like a penny in our currency. You can't have an amount less, you can't make change for less than a penny. You can't hand out anything less than a segment. So what happens if you don't need a whole segment? What happens if you need only 3.5 sectors? Well, this slide is illustrating that particular situation. The gold disk is supposed to be the digital media, and the green piece out here is a file that takes up 3.5 sectors. So when we write to that file to the disk or to the media, it writes all 3.5 sectors, but the question is, what happens to this extra half a sector? And the answer is that extra half sector right here stays. Nothing happens to it. So this is a fragment of some previously existing file that hasn't gotten overwritten. And that could be, any kind of document. It could be an employee evaluation. It could be budget. It could be confidential contracts. It could be anything. And this data tends to hang around for a long time. And this is called file slack. Now again, a little look at what my world looks like. This is again a view from the tool named EnCase, and it's the forensic view. You can see we're looking at this little file right here in the red circle with wireless, I think is the name of it. The tool says that it was deleted and later overwritten. And now if you look down at what's in the file, all of this black part is the new file. But my tool colors all of the slack space in red. So all of this in red is left over from a previous file. And again, that could be one of many, many kinds of things that are confidential. It could be things that show harassment. It could be an embarrassing email. It could be all kinds of things. What can you do about file slack? The overriding tools that I talk about all have an option that says overwrite file slack. So as part of your cleanup, you can go in and overwrite these slack sections, which will take away this old data that's hanging around and hitchhiking. So the next topic I want to talk about is what you need to do if you think you have a case needing electronic investigation. I get phone calls all the time from attorneys who say, I don't know much about these computers, but I think I need your help, Johnette. So what do? Well, the first step in starting an investigation is to get our hands on the computers and digital devices that have the data. And we want to make copies of them in a forensically sound way. That means that we want to make certain that we don't change them, but we get good copies. If we have computers and laptops and phones and whatnot, we can bring them into our lab to work on them. That is the most cost-effective way to go about the beginning of an investigation. Obviously, you can't do that. In many cases, you may have business-critical devices that can't be shut down. You may have servers, so we can come in and work on site. In the old days, I used to strike terror into the hearts of IT directors when I came in and told them their servers were going to have to be shut down for several hours. But we now have pretty sophisticated techniques that will let us do this copying process without having to shut down networks and computers. So our goal in this is to make what I call a valid forensic image of each device and piece of media that we're dealing with. Now, this valid forensic image is sometimes called a mirror image or ghost image, but each of those terms has duplicate meanings, so I avoid them, and I use the phrase valid forensic image. And what a valid forensic image is an exact bit-by-bit copy of whatever media it is that we want to examine. And ordinary copying, the kind that you do when you want to copy a file or copy a CD, doesn't work. And that's because the user tools that do the copying don't copy things like deleted items, free space, file fragments, and all the various artifacts that we can get our hands on. It just copies files, and in fact, it may actually alter them somewhat in the process of copying them. You may remember in the days of floppies that floppies had in the upper left corner a little plastic tab that you could push, and that would make the floppy write-proof. And we used that when we were trying to secure things like tests and documents to attorneys and whatnot. And the problem is that operating systems, when you start a computer, the operating system writes to every drive that it can get its hands on, and you can't prevent that. And it makes as many, Windows at least, makes as many as 160 changes when you boot up a Windows computer. And that may destroy the very data that you're looking for. And there's a joke in forensics that we borrow from other people that says there's only 3 rules of forensics. First, protect the original data. Second, protect the original data. And, of course, the third is, when in doubt, view rules 1 and 2. So we're all about protecting the data and make sure it's not altered. So how do we do that? Windows writes to it. We can't stop it. We do that with by installing some sort of intervening hardware, and this one is called a lockdown. It's made and sold now by Encase, I think. But we install it between the drive, which is on the left that we want to make a copy of, and the computer that's going to receive the copy on the right. And so this write blocker, it's called, sits between the original and the destination and prevents that original computer from writing to our original file. Then once we have the image, we can dispose of the original drive. We can give it back to the original owner if it's a civil case. If it's highly contested or if it's a criminal case, typically we will keep it or law enforcement will keep it. And all the subsequent work is done on these images. And we have tools that can read the image and can protect that image from being changed. And it lets us search for terms. It lets us, the tools, lets us pull out email, identify pictures, and gives us a lot of ways that we can look at these images. And you've seen several examples of what the Encase interface looks like in things that I presented earlier. And so our last topic here, one more trick of the trade. This is a theory topic, and both my students and at the university and my clients kind of yawn and lean back when I start this one, but I promise you it's important to you. If for no other reason that this has been suggested as a replacement for Bates numbers throughout litigation. And this is a subject that's called hash codes. And hash codes grew out of encryption technology and the desire to be able to verify email messages. And what a hash code is, it's just a number or a value. And you get one by taking a file, applying this big, long formula to it, and then generating this answer thing. It's called the hash code for that file. And the nice thing about it is that the tiniest change in the file will generate a very large change in the hash code. So in this slide, I have here's a phrase, and I've applied hash coding to it. And this long thing starting with E and ending with 0 is the hash code for the phrase, here is the phrase. And again, I have a tool that does it. Nobody does this by hand. On the next slide, you'll see I've taken the phrase, here is a phrase, and added a period. And now I generated the hash code for that, and you'll see that it's totally different. So even a novice at an easy glance can tell that these two phrases are not the same. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, it lets us uniquely identify a file. So if you claim you have an exact copy of my file, all I have to do is run the hash values on it to verify that. So even if it's thousands and thousands of pages long, the hash code will tell me in an instant whether or not they're same. And people create whole libraries of these hash codes for various purposes. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, for example, known as NCMEC, keeps a library of the hash code of images that have been deemed by a court as child porn. And anybody who's involved in child porn cases can get to that library and know instantly whether or not a picture that they're dealing with has previously been certified as child porn. Within forensics, there are lots and lots of files on a drive that we know have nothing to do with the case. Things that have to do with operating systems and the word processor and the spreadsheet application. And there's really no need to search those files or look at them. If we do, then we get lots of false hits and things that are totally irrelevant to the case. So what we do then is we have large libraries of hash codes of these standard files. And one of the first things you do in a forensic investigation is rule out all of those that you know by hash code are useless files. And again, it's been proposed that this substitute for Bates values. You may, based on these, have an opinion as to whether or not you want to identify files this way rather than Bates numbers. But nonetheless, that has been proposed by a fairly heavyweight computer forensic investigator. So how does this deal with chain of custody? The hash value is crucial in dealing with chain of custody, and it's the reason that the courts will accept work done on the images and not work done on the original. So what we do is we compute the hash value of the original disk or media, whatever it is, whether it's, you saw a simple expression, it can be a file, a whole drive, it can be anything digital. Then after we make the image, we can compute the hash value of the image and then go back and do the hash value of the original. And if these three should all be the same, and assuming that they are, that shows that we have what's called a valid forensic image. It's valid because the hash values match. It's forensic because it copied every single bit. So in a nutshell, what we've talked about today is that what's now called digital forensics, it used to be called computer forensics, is really not limited to computers. There are very few devices that we deal with that don't have some sort of digital interface to them, and any of those are subject to investigation. The earlier you get a forensic specialist involved, the greater the chance that you'll get the evidence that you need and won't be spoliating evidence that you need to keep. I have a favorite attorney. In fact, he was counsel on the Dow case, that his standard phrase is, shut it down and call Johnette. But even if you end up not having a forensic case, we can give you advice on how to preserve what you do have and what you need to. We really urge that non-forensic users should not examine the evidence. And it's human nature. You're a corporate executive. You think you have something going on. Your first instinct is to call your IT department and say, would you look into this and what's going on? And most IT people do not have forensic experience. They have lots of system experience. They have system tools that can do all kinds of things. And they go and start looking around to see what they can see to determine whether or not there is whether or not there's evidence that you need to go forward with your internal suspicion or investigation. And that very looking around and poking around can destroy the data that you need most. So I urge you that as soon as possible, that you have as few people as possible deal with the data until you get a forensic person in there to give you some advice. And obviously, I hope this has helped you understand some of the things that you need to do to preserve your own integrity. I started to tell this story earlier when it was a little too early, but I had a student that was a very, very good student and was applying to some of the top graduate schools in the country. and she asked for a letter of recommendation. So I wrote a base letter, and then I saved it with the name of the university she was applying to. Then I took a copy and I tailored it for the next university, the students who'd gone there and been successful and who we knew, et cetera. And I did that for 7 different universities. So when you got to the last version, after it had been saved 7 times with different names, you could see a list of all the schools that she'd applied to. And that's the kind of thing that can happen in documents that get reused. So I hope that some of the things I've talked about here will help you in policies and procedures for your own office, as well as those for your client. So I will take questions again here. I'm always happy to take questions. I do offer a complimentary consultation, initial consultation on cases, so you're free to call me. I'm pretty easy to find on the web. Here's the question: how dangerous is it to do communication privileged info with your client by email? It is very dangerous. It's not discoverable, but it can be inadvertently produced. I mean, when I communicate with a client, I say with a client or with an attorney, either one, I just say, please call me. Be certain to put all your privilege notifications on it if you do. So, as I said, they're not discoverable, but we may stumble into them. For example, you may have a long list of emails. You may send something privileged, I may send something back that's privileged, and then the next one, what they add to the email may be unprivileged, and the subsequent back and forth between you two may be unprivileged. Well, an e-discovery tool will likely present that as one long communication. Okay? And then when the reviewer sees it, they'll see the unprivileged stuff at the bottom, and hopefully they'll read the whole chain and see the privileged stuff at the top. Then they have to split it and make a determination. Or if they're in a hurry or careless, they'll see that the bottom part is all unprivileged and will mark it as unprivileged and producible, and you'll end up producing privileged data.
For the next question, could the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A once again? Thank you.
Gotta have passcodes for everything. How can you tell if a program has been erased or erased programs have been used? Very good question. Quite frankly, many of those answers are secret. We spend a lot of time figuring out how we can tell. So typically, for example, if there's a new tool out, we take a sample image, we image it, a sample computer, we image it, we delete something, we image that, and we compare the images and find the differences, and then we go through and track down what all those ones and zeros mean. So many of us have libraries of these things, and we don't publish them because they're our very private, very valuable work. However, there are some common ones. For example, one of the most common ways to do overwriting is to overwrite with the common pattern. And our forensic tools will quickly spot any place that there's a common pattern that goes on and on. Some of the tools will actually leave an entry in the registry to say that they were there. Some of them leave a copy of the prompt in a particular place where Windows stages things. So it's not easy and it's not trivial, but we can work our way through most of them. The next question is, someone has used Danix, Nuke, or Boot, or a similar program to wipe a disk. What would you be able to find out? Ooh, depending on how they use it, you might be able to tell that it's been wiped by some of the patterns. You can also infer the date that it was wiped. Now, if you wipe the directory structure, let me think about this. In some cases, you can find the date that it was last changed, and that will tell you that something has happened to it. But that's probably the hardest case if you nuke and wipe an entire drive. Okay, well, a couple of more things. Let's see. I'm looking down here. I'm looking at, oops. I'm sorry. Here I'm looking. I'm stealing their slides. All right. Where I wanted to go back to is here. Resources that you can find. The one from Guidance Software under the Resource tab has some particularly good articles on forensics, on security, on deletions. Let's see, there's another question. How can you tell if someone has accessed a suspect drive? You can usually tell that from the dates, the access dates, because the directory changes them. The next question is, how do you produce the metadata? There are tools. There are a couple of ways to do it. The easiest way is to get a tool that will do it for you, and there are some inexpensive ones out there, and they will produce the metadata, the dates, and the file paths in a format that's kind of like a spreadsheet, and you can put it into a spreadsheet. You can also do the dates by getting a tool that will print directory information and show the information in your directory and then make a screenshot of it. That's not as desirable because it's not electronic and you can't sort it, but it will work. It will allow you to produce it. Cloud storage. Cloud storage produces lots of challenges, and the reason that they are such a challenge is that your in a cloud. The first question is, what's the cloud? Typically what we call the cloud is just a big farm of servers where your data is stored with lots of other people. If you've been through the Southwest and seen energy farms where there are solar panels out, it's like that, except the servers store data. And on these cloud servers, your data is separated. Is mixed among other people's data. So things like slack space are much harder to get anything that's useful out of. And all of case law and all of forensics is evolving fairly rapidly to deal with cloud storage. I think that's about our time, isn't it, Emily?
We have 2 more questions if you wanted to answer those.
Okay, I will take those. Let's see, how about virtual PCs and Citrix? Again, on the virtual PC, it's managed by the same operating system as the others. So if you can get to the virtual one, then you can see the same kinds of data. And there is a tool called VMware that will let you mount tools in virtual environments and run them. That's one of the really handy tools that we have in forensics. Yeah, the next one is, can the actual text deleted or overwritten from a Word document file that is produced be recovered? Oh, that's a very good question. WordPerfect keeps the last 10 edits, and from WordPerfect you can get the text that was deleted. But in Microsoft Word, you cannot once the document has been saved. Now, occasionally, the Word will be shut down without saving the document, and there will be a fragment file laying around that has the change in it that's not been posted to the original, and you can find that if you can get some good search terms. But within the document itself, no, you can't recover that in Microsoft Word. Yes, you can. Let's see. This is a question. Assuming you don't have it, you don't need to disclose the document in native format, do you recommend printing out a document, scanning it to PDF, and then scrubbing the PDF? Actually, I recommend getting a tool and going straight to PDF because you will leave it searchable. And at least the federal rules are quite clear that the product that what you produce should be searchable. And any client of mine that receives it will raise Cain if you don't provide it in a searchable form. But yes, either putting it into metadata, either putting it into a PDF format electronically, or printing it and scanning that electronically will get rid of the original metadata, but it will start a whole new chain of metadata that will have information about where the PDF document has been. We have another question here. What if a document in question is created in part on a personal laptop and in part on the public library? Is it practical and easy enough to find the MAC dates on the public computer? On the public computer, in theory, yes, but because it's public, the chances of it being overwritten and the directory space being reused is pretty high. The document will still have the metadata that's appropriate. So if, for example, the last modification was done on your PC and then you had it on a public system, but you didn't modify it, that last modified date would stay there. So the dates will go with the document. So they're stored in the directory, but they go with the document as you move it around. The problem is that if you wanted to recover anything from the directory is probably gone and bad.
Okay, those are all the questions we have, so thank you so much for answering those. We'll continue on. Let's see.
Here, I'll put you down here where you belong, Emily.
This webinar is eligible for CLE credit in California, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Texas. To ensure that you receive your CLE credit, please complete the survey at the end of the presentation. This is a reminder that certificates will be provided within 24 to 48 hours via email. In addition to being your best source for testifying and consulting experts, TASA also offers e-discovery and document management solutions, free interactive webinars, and research reports on expert witnesses such as the Challenge History Report 2.0, the Professional Sanction Search, and the Expert Profile 360. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially Johnette Hassell for her time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with Dr. Hassell, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. This is a reminder that we will be sending out a link to you tomorrow with the archive recording. The archive recording will also be posted in the Knowledge Center on TASA's website. If you have any questions or comments, please email Carol Kowaleski. Thank you all again for attending, and have a great day, everyone.